Section 7 of The Romance of an Old Fool. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Melin. The Romance of an Old Fool by Roswell Field. Section 7. Love at 8 and 40 is a very pleasant and indolent emotion, marking the most delightful stage in the progress of the great human passion. At 25 we talk it. At 35 we act it. At 45 it is pleasant to sit down and think about it. The very young man loves without really analyzing. 10 years later he analyzes without really loving. In another decade he has compounded the proportions of love and analysis and becomes, under favoring conditions, the most dangerous and hence the most acceptable of suitors. The man in middle life takes his adored one tolerantly and keeps his reservations to himself. In the ordinary course of events he has acquired a certain knowledge of feminine character. He knows the rocks and the shoals of love, and, skillful pilot that he is, he avoids them. He is sure of his course, master of his equipment, if he errs at all, but I anticipate. Those were very joyous days, notwithstanding the applications of cold water so liberally bestowed by my confidential advisers, and eagerly and successfully I exerted myself to convince the doubting ones in general, and Bunsey in particular, how absurd were their suspicions, and how apparent it was that Phyllis and I had been purposely created for each other. Mary threw herself into our pleasures as heartily and joyously as her New England nature would permit, which was never a very riotous demonstration, and Phyllis, with the effervescence and enthusiasm of girlhood, eagerly assented to every proposition that had its pleasure-seeking side, while I, as a thoughtful lover should, busied myself in schemes for summer dissipation, thankful that it was in my power to prove so devoted a knight, and inwardly rejoicing at my triumph over those who had taxed me with such unworthy thoughts. Even Frederick, good fellow that he was, allowed himself unusual days of vacation to partake of our merriment, and it pleased me greatly to see that when business cares or physical disinclination kept me off the program, he no longer allowed his indifference to interfere with his duty as my nephew and personal representative. Such, I take it, is the obligation of all young men similarly placed. For before many weeks had passed, I discovered that it was not wise to allow the fleeting dissipations of the moment, however alluring, to monopolize time which should be given to the serious affairs of life. I found that a cramped position in a boat in the hot sun brought on nervous headaches, and that too much time in the garden, when the dew was falling, was conducive to lumbago. Furthermore, I had been invited by a neighboring university to deliver my celebrated lecture on the protagonism of Plato, and several new and excellent thoughts had come to me which required careful and elaborate development. I explained these matters conscientiously and fully to Phyllis, and while she offered no unreasonable protest, her pretty face clouded, and she did me the honor to say that half the enjoyment was removed by my absence. Once she even went so far as to declare that Plato was a horrid man, and that she believed I thought more of him than of her, a most ridiculous conclusion, but so essentially feminine that I forgave her at once. And when she came to me and put her arms around my neck and urged me to go with her to a tennis match, a foolish game where grown-up people knock little balls over a net with a battledore, I pointed out to her that such spectacles, while eminently proper for young folk, argued a failing mind in those of maturer years. With a charming pout she said, Do you think you would have refused to go if my mother had asked you? Now, tennis is a sport that has come up since Sylvia and I were children together, but I recalled, with a guilty blush, the time when she and I won the village championship in doubles in an all-day siege of croquet. So what could I say in my own defense? Therefore I went with Phyllis to the tennis court, and sat for 2 long and inexpressibly dreary hours watching the senseless and stupid proceedings. It was pleasant to reflect that I was with Sylvia's daughter, and I tried to imagine that the keen interest of youth still remained, but I was sadly out of place. I am satisfied that this game of tennis has nothing of the fascinating quality of croquet. On our arrival home, Phyllis kissed me, and thanked me for what she called my self-denial, but after that one experience, Frederick represented me at the tennis court, as, indeed, the good-natured boy consented to do at many similar festivities. And so the summer wore gradually away, one day's enjoyment lazily following another's, with nothing to disturb the serenity of my life, or to interfere with the calm content into which I had settled. Phyllis was everything that a moderate and reasonable lover could wish: kind, gentle, affectionate within the bounds of maidenly discretion, attentive to my wishes, and considerate of my caprices. The more I saw of her, the more I was persuaded that I had chosen wisely and well. One afternoon, Frederick, at my suggestion, had gallantly given up his work in the office, and taken Phyllis down the river. I sat with Bunsey in the library, and took occasion to expound to him the philosophy of perfect love. "The trouble is," I said, "that people rush blindly into matrimony. They think they are in love, work themselves up to the proper pitch of madness, propose and marry while they are in delirium. Hence so much of the wretchedness and misery that we see in the homes of our friends. For my part, I am committed to the doctrine of affinities. It is true that I, like many others, was guilty of the usual folly in my youth, and perhaps that gave me the wisdom to wait for my second venture until precisely the right party came along. Matrimony, Bunsey, is an exact science. If we regulate our passion, control all silly emotion, study feminine nature as critically and methodically as we investigate a mathematical problem, and commit ourselves only when the affinity presents herself, we shall make no mistakes. For, after all, what is an affinity? Nothing more than a human being sent by Providence, as perfectly adapted to the wheels and curves of your nature." "A very pretty theory," retorted Bunsey, grimly. "And, by the way, when do you think of rushing into matrimony?" "Really," I said, somewhat confused, "to be entirely honest with you, I have not settled on any particular day. You see, Phyllis should have her fling. She is very young." "True, but you are not." As Bunsey said this, he rose and tossed his cigar out of the window. "Stanhope," he went on, "we are old friends, and I don't wish to be continually seeming to interfere with your business. But if I were a man with 50 years leering hideously at me, and engaged to a pretty girl of 22, I'd make quick work of it before Providence came along with a younger affinity in a Panama hat, negligee shirt, and duck trousers." I stared at him with a sort of helpless amazement. "Exactly what do you mean?" I asked. "Well," he answered, shrugging his shoulders, "at the risk of being kicked out of the house, let me say that I think such an affinity has already presented himself." "Indeed, and who may that be?" "Suppose we say Frederick." "My nephew?" Exactly, your nephew. He is an uncommonly good-looking fellow, and thanks to his uncle's childlike belief in Providence and the doctrine of affinities, he has most unusual opportunities to test that doctrine for himself. I dare say that he is making a formal study of the situation at this very moment, and inviting Providence to appear on the scene as his sponsor. What more was said at this interview, if indeed it did not terminate with this brutal statement, I cannot recall, for Bunsey, usually so flippant and cynical, spoke with an earnestness that stunned me. My knowledge of the philosophy of love told me that he was wrong. My observation of the actualities of life made me fear that he might be right. Theoretically, I could not have been mistaken in my course. Practically, I began to see weak spots in the chain of evidence. Swiftly I ran over the events of the spring and summer, and as little spots no bigger than a man's hand magnified themselves into black clouds, Bunsey, sitting opposite, seemed to grow larger and larger, and his smile more malicious and demon-like. Possibly, had I been a younger and more impetuous man, I should have flown into a passion, taken Bunsey at his word, and kicked him out of the house. But the philosophy of the thing engrossed me, filled me with half fear, half curiosity, and engaged all my mental faculties. Had I been mistaken? Could I be deceived in the daughter of Sylvia? However strong my suspicions may have been, they were not increased when, with the evening, Phyllis and Frederick came home from their excursion. Never was Phyllis more unreserved, more cordial, more joyous, more attentive to the little wants, which I, in a mean and shameful test, imposed on her. She could not be acting a part, this New England girl, with her alert conscience, her Puritan impulse and training, her aversion to everything that savored of deceit. And Frederick was as much at his ease as if I knew nothing, as if I had not heard of his duplicity, as if the whole house and grounds were not ringing with accusations of his unworthiness. Such are the phenomena of the philosophy of middle life. I insisted that he should remain for the evening, and, after dinner, with that contrariness accountable only in a true student of psychology, I made a trifling excuse and walked down to the square, leaving them together. The curfew was ringing as, returning, I entered the lower gate at the end of the garden, and passed slowly along by the arbor. It may have been Providence, it may have been chance. It certainly was not philosophy that directed my steps to the far side of the syringa hedge, which shut me off from the view of those who might come down to the rustic seat at the foot of the cherry tree. At least I had no intention of playing the spy, and when I heard Frederick's voice, and knew instinctively that Phyllis was with him, I quickened my pace that I might not be a sharer of their secrets. But an irresistible impulse made me pause when I heard the foolish fellow say, "After tonight I shall not come again. It is better for us to break now than to wait until it is too late." Her reply I could not hear. Presently he said, and a little brokenly, "I have fought it all out. It has been hard, so hard, but I must meet it as it comes." Then I heard Phyllis's voice, "It is for the best. I believe that you care for me. I know how much I care for you, and how much this effort is costing me. We were too late. No other course in honor presents itself. God knows how eagerly and hopelessly I have sought a way out of this tangle of duty." Again I heard Phyllis's voice, sunk almost to a whisper, "I have given my word. It is for the best." "The governor has been so good to me," Frederick exclaimed resentfully, "that I feel like a criminal even at this moment when I am making for him the sacrifice of a life. He has been my father, my protector. What I am I owe to him, and I must meet him like a grateful and honest man. You would not have it otherwise?" And for the third time Phyllis answered, "It is for the best." Had I been of that remarkable stuff of which your true hero is made, of which Bunsey's heroes are made, and had I come up to the very reasonable expectations of the followers of literary romance, I should have burst through the syringa with passion in my face and rage in my heart, and precipitated a tragedy. Or, on the other side, I should have taken those ridiculous children by the hand, and ended their suffering with my blessing, then and there. But as I am only of very common clay, with little liking for heroics, I did what any selfish and unappreciative man would have done, and stole quietly away. I even felt a sort of fierce joy in the knowledge of the security of my position, a mean exultation in the thought that Phyllis was bound to me, and that those from whom I might reasonably fear the most acknowledged the hopelessness of their case. Most strangely there came to me no resentment with the knowledge that I had been supplanted by my nephew in the affections of the girl. The fact that she loved another surprised rather than agitated me. My argument was upset. My doctrine of affinities had been seriously damaged in my individual case, and here was I, who should have been yielding to the pangs of disappointment, or raging with wounded pride, reflecting with considerable calmness on the reverses of a philosopher. I went into the library and lighted a cigar. I threw myself into an easy chair, and as I looked up I saw a spider web in a corner of the ceiling. "I must speak to Prudence about that in the morning," I said to myself with annoyance. Then for the first time it came to me that I was out of temper, for I am customarily tranquil and not easily upset. My mind wandered rapidly from one thing to another, and oddly enough I caught myself humming a little tune, which had no sort of relevancy to the events of the day. I tried to dismiss the incident of the garden as the temporary folly of a romantic girl, which would wear itself out with a week's absence. Why should it trouble me? Had I been lacking in kindness or affection? Should I be disturbed because a few boat rides and the influence of moonlight had wrought on a mere child? Was I not secure in her promise, and had I not heard her say she had given her word? As for Frederick, was he not my debtor? Had he not confessed it? Then why give more thought to the matter? It was awkward, but both were young and both would outlive it. Sylvia and I were young, and we outlived it. But still kept ringing in my ears that despairing half whisper, "It is for the best." Petulantly I threw away my cigar and went up to my room. I walked over to the dressing case and turned up the gas. The shadow displeased me, and I lighted the opposite jet. Then I stood squarely before the mirror and looked critically at the reflection. Yes, John Stanhope, you are growing old. That expanding forehead, with the retreating hairs, tells the tale of time. The gray upon your cheeks is whitening, and the razor must be used more vigilantly to further deception. Those creases in your face can no longer be dismissed as character lines. The shagginess of your eyebrows has the flying years to account for it. Plainly, John, You and humbug must part company. You are not of this generation, and it is not for you." I turned down the gas, threw open the window and let the moonlight filter in through the elms and over the tops of the little pines. The soft beauty of the night soothed me, and gradually and very gently my irritation and annoyance slipped away. Why should not a young girl, radiant in youth and beauty, affect a young man of her generation? What has an old fellow, with all his money and worldly experience and burnt-out youth, to give in exchange for that intoxication which every girl may properly regard her lawful gift? Undoubtedly I should make a better husband, as husbands go, than my romantic nephew, and any woman of rare common sense would see the advantages of my position. But why burden a woman with that rare common sense which robs her of the first and sweetest of her dreams? No, John Stanhope, go back to your pipe and your books and your gardening, your life of selfish, indolent do-nothing. Take life as it comes most easily and naturally. By sparing one heart, you may save two. And that nephew of mine, what a fine, manly fellow he proved himself when put to the test. The governor had been good to him, and he was going to stand by the governor. How my heart jumped, and what a warm little feeling there was about the internal cockles as I recalled his words. Bravely said, my boy, and nobly done. I fear I should not have been so generous at your age, and with Sylvia. And with Sylvia. How the past crowded back at the thought of her. Who are you, old dreamer, who neglected the gift the good gods provided in the heyday of your youth, to return to chase the phantom of the past? Behind that little white cloud, sailing far into the north, Sylvia may be peeping at you, and smiling at the delusion of her ancient wooer. Or why not think that she is pleading with you, pleading for her child and the lover, as she might have pleaded for herself and somebody else, had somebody else known his own heart before it was too late? I watched the white cloud as it passed on, growing smaller and fainter as it receded. I settled back still deeper in my chair and sighed. And then, oh, unworthy night of love, and then I fell asleep. End of section 7. Recording by Roger Melin.